Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Law, Buildings, and Code Committee meeting this evening. We are joined by committee members, Councilmember Anane, Clark, Conti, and myself, Farrell. We're also joined by Councilmember Zamer. We have our incredible staff, Brian Jimenez, Shaniqua Jackson, and Brett Williams from Corp Counsel's office. We also have a number of members of the administration and departments who have joined us, but I will allow them to introduce themselves as they come up to speak about different topics. I believe that everybody on this list is speaking specifically on the residency legislation, so if it's okay, we'll move through the agenda, and when we get to that, definitely we'll welcome everybody that would like to speak on it. Is there anyone that is here that would like to speak on a different piece of legislation? Seeing none, we'll move forward with the agenda. The first ordinance, 217124, was asked by the sponsors to hold on it. They were unable to be here this evening and wanted to speak a bit more about it. So we will be holding that and look forward to a future law committee meeting to discuss it. The next one, ordinance 248124, an ordinance amending Chapter 359, Vehicles and Traffic, and Chapter 251, Parks and Recreation of the Code of the City of Albany in relation to the operation of active transportation in the City of Albany. Councilmember Zamer is a co-sponsor with myself. Councilmember Zamer, would you like to say any words on it?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make sure that Mr. Brennan wasn't planning to provide comment. You just can't, we had asked about comment, and
I was going to call on him after. I was just giving you an opportunity to speak first.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, this is a pretty straightforward, I mean, we've worked hard, certainly. Councilmember Farrell has worked very hard on this, updating our code, which is pretty outdated and obsolete when it comes to the kinds of transportation, active transportation that's on our city streets right now. So this accounts for some of our electric vehicles that might be unregistered or unlicensed.
Yes, and Mr. Brennan, if you would like to say anything, you're welcome to. There is absolutely no pressure to do so. The nice thing about a committee meeting is we get to defer to what the chair wants, and I would love for you to come speak.
Oh, press there. Okay. There, now it's on. I went through it. I think, you know, we had a bunch of people that made some recommendations, cited some things, and I'm glad. I think we caught up to most of them. I think the only odd thing just that you might want to take note of is that the definition of light electric vehicles, any small light electric vehicle not exceeding 100 pounds, such as electric bikes, electric scooters, electric skateboards, you just might want to consider that some of those devices might go very fast. You know, the e-bike statute, the state statute, only allows Class 1, Class 2 e-bikes outside of New York City. Their speeds are not allowed to, their devices can't be propelled by the motor any faster than 20 miles an hour. Some of those devices might not, by the definition here, they might go faster than that. So just a thought, you might want to incorporate some of that language from the e-bike statute just to make sure that you're not getting something that can outrace a police car or something like that.
Yeah, and I apologize, I thought that we referred to yeah, we refer to the New York State Vehicle and Traffic Law.
Yeah,
And as a municipality, we have to apply by all New York State laws. So I would think that that's covered, but,
yeah, I just saw that as questionable. It's just kind of getting mixed up, because it's a new definition. I don't think that light electric vehicle is a definition under the state statute. They wouldn't be registerable motor vehicles, but, like an electric skateboard or like an electric unicycle, something like that.
and I do think that, so my personal preference for code is to reference state law, because state laws change and not articulate the state law in our code. So it allows the flexibility of the state law. But I would completely agree, and I think we've discussed with potentially it might not have been with other bike advocates, but with wonderful advocates for bike and pedestrian safety, to actually try to do some sort of informational thing to kind of help people understand. And that's something that I think Jackie Gonzalez said that they would be willing to help with, to kind of put together something. But I'll go back through my emails and discover exactly who said that, because somebody definitely said, we can help work through that. Completely agreed that there should be something that people understand, that you need to, if you're going to be on an e-bike of some sort, you have to follow the state laws, and that
Right.
should be something that's readily available. And that's, agreed. And it also
Yeah.
would be helpful to have something where people can actually, with the change of this code, that they can understand where you can and, like, what you can and cannot do. Because although there are, I'm sure, people out there that would check out the code before they would ride their bike on a sidewalk, I'm assuming most people would have no idea that they're actually supposed to stop their bike and get off of it
Right.
and walk around a pedestrian. And also the concept of that our sidewalks are, the pedestrian has the right of way. The pedestrian is the one who we are working around. So if you need to be on the sidewalk and there's any sort of uncomfort with pedestrian safety, the onus is on the non-pedestrian.
Right. No, otherwise, I think it's great, and I think that, I thank you all very much for all the time and effort that you've put into it.
And I have to say, it would not happen without Ed. Ed and Ann Savage were instrumental in putting together this code. So thank you very much for your continued advocacy, and also for all of your work on this. Do we have any questions? Councilmember Conti? Before, we are also joined by committee member, Councilmember Rick Egan.
Okay. Yeah, I had two areas. I mean, one is an editing area, which I can't help, but, being a bill drafter. Part I want to get to understand better the section on bicycles or other human-propelled vehicles on sidewalks. And, that's an issue, of course, with certain sidewalks where they are narrow and pedestrian crowded, like Lark and some other areas where you do have issues with bicyclists. The 10-year-old, under 10-year-old exemption is kind of like, is eliminated, so it's just more of a general provision. But also like things like skateboards or roller skaters, where it creates potential problems. How, if there are issues there, safety issues, pedestrian, how is that potentially enforced, since it's kind of a subjective standard than objective? And I don't know if, in terms of the police or the chief, even looked at this or has any thoughts on it.
The enforcement comes from the pedestrian shall have the right of way.
Right. Which,
so in any case that a pedestrian, there's also clear rules on what does or doesn't happen. It is entirely possible that we might need further articulation of this, or penalties, something along those lines, which very happy to bring that in. But the intent was that the people on the sidewalk have the right of way
Yeah,
on the sidewalk.
Right, that's understood, I just wondering,
And then there's also, you're not really, you can ride on the sidewalk when you feel unsafe. And there's a lot of places in the city of Albany where you do not feel safe in the roadway as a bicyclist. The issue with having specific zones, as we've discovered with the skateboarding ordinance that was not really ever enforced, is that you can't really, it was hard for enforcement for that as well. So this sets up a clear set of rules where the pedestrian has the right of way. It is the pedestrian safety that matters on the sidewalk. And anybody that is not a pedestrian or using some sort of disability device that they need. We don't specifically say strollers, but I think they would count too. That's the concept.
yeah, no, I understand the issue of pedestrian priority, which most people don't understand, but I think this, and it is better because when you took out in the previous amendments, took out the provisions relating to some prohibitions on skateboarding on sidewalks, you kind of send a message that it's allowed anywhere, so you're putting in a restriction here that relates to pedestrian safety and code. So I think you need to do a lot of education also to make sure people understand, because right now the perception is that anything goes.
No, completely. And I think that I think it's an incredibly important thing that we should be doing anyway. It's hard to do that without a code that kind of articulates what you're supposed to be doing. But I think that we should be communicating what's okay in different spaces. We also have a lot of different ways to go around now that, I mean, obviously when our original code was created, it was before cars, and when velocipedes were normal. This creates, now we've got scooters and one-wheeled things and wheelies on shoes, and there's so many different ways that you can go with wheels that it's just difficult to wrap your mind around. This creates something where if they come up with a hoverboard, which they have, sorry, I take that back. I guess they're not covered with this technically.
I don't know.
Well, they would be motorized, so you'd have to be on the street, because no motors on the sidewalk. I take that back, hoverboards are covered. But if there's a person, whatever, anything in the future, regardless, the pedestrian has the right of way. And I think that is something that it is important that we need to kind of articulate and do a lot of education about it. And I think we should have been before. I think that's one of the things that we've been missing, is that there isn't the same understanding of the safety of people on a sidewalk. It turns into a big back and forth instead of actually trying to educate people on proper sidewalk etiquette and being protective of people and being understanding, while enabling other forms of people-powered movement, including wheels, that can happen on the roadway, with the option of, if you're not feeling safe, there's a lot of places in the city you do not feel safe on the roadway. And I would agree that I wouldn't think most of the places around Center Square is that. Although there's certainly places where people speed along there where that could be the case.
They speed everywhere.
They do speed everywhere, sadly.
Okay. The other area is really editing and bill drafting, which I've raised this before. There are three areas in particular I see where words are amended by amending letters as opposed to striking a whole word. I mean, I've never seen that before in terms of my experience of bill drafting in the Assembly for close to 30 years. So on 359-7, subparagraph B, where you have no person shall operate what a motorized, well, an unregistered motorized vehicle. What was previously a becomes an N. You should strike the letter A and insert an N. There's one here on 359-24, where the header for motor vehicle use, where the word vehicle, which was previously lowercase, instead of, I'm sorry, it was previously the V was uppercase. It's confusing. Instead, you strike the V and insert a lowercase v when you should strike the whole word and insert the word as properly spelled. Same thing on 251-7, where you amend vehicle by striking a letter and inserting a capital, and at the end where you amend parks by inserting an S as opposed to striking the whole word and reasserting. So those are some examples. It's also confusing when you do this with numbers, and when in the middle of a number, it gets really confusing. So bill drafting, you really need to strike the entire word, even if you're just dealing with, taking a singular to a plural or capitalizing and inserting the new one. So I hope that can be addressed. It's minor, but it does, in certain cases, I've seen it before, it gets confusing when you're trying to read it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, I will say that will not,
That doesn't change anything.
that doesn't change anything substantively. Thank you for that.
I'm sorry for nitpicking, but
Do you have-
that's...
No,
yeah,
do you have
okay.
anything?
That's all I have now.
Okay. Councilmember Clark?
Just a question on 251-7, so getting towards the end of the legislation.
51?
Subsection C,
Oh, it's in one, yeah.
subsection C says no part of Washington or Lincoln Park shall be used for instruction, so just curious.
Because they're the only parks that have roadways through them. The other ones have, and this was, we're not really sure the origin of this. It really was an origin, and it used to say, if you look at it, you couldn't teach anybody how to do anything, and it was just Lincoln Park, I think. So somebody must have been teaching people to drive in Lincoln Roadway. So we decided to keep it and just have it be that you can't keep people to drive in Washington or Lincoln Park. I don't know if it's an issue if people are using like Westland Hills parking lot I wouldn't honestly have an issue. I taught my kids to drive at Myers parking lot. I would have used Washington, or I would have considered Westland Hills, but I don't know that it's actually an issue. I think if it becomes an issue where people are teaching their kid to drive and parking lots and it's unsafe, we could certainly include all parks with it, but this is specifically because there's roadways through the parks that people are driving on, and I'm assuming at one point somebody must have been teaching people how to drive and it caused problems.
Okay, yeah, and it wasn't necessarily specific to Westland Hills, but certainly haven't really thought about what impact that could have at every park, so it
That's
seemed
because you
very
don't have a
specific.
16-year-old yet.
Sure. And then just the final question on subsection E at the end. It states in coordination with the Active Transportation Planning Commission. I just wonder if that should be more, upon recommendation, or just want to make sure we're consistent with our commissions, that there's not too much power granted to, like, I don't want to grant something to the commission that may not otherwise exist there. So I just want to make sure that coordination is the right word to make sure that certainly we're consulting, but the Commissioner of Recreation would have the final determination. I don't have a strong feeling, I just want to.
Yeah,
I think
no,
that's,
I definitely, I totally understand, and off the top of my head, I don't know if that's consistent with other pieces. I think we can check into that. Brett might know that. I will say, in state law, that's the common term that you use if you're, and at least in state law, it insinuates that they check in and ask about it and get their feedback, but then they're not doing it. It's a different word that I'm not going to remember because it was a long day there.
Can I ask a question? Maybe I can ask you, Brett, is that flexible enough? You know, it's not always easy to fill positions on commissions, and you wouldn't want that to hamper.
I missed the first part, well, I missed,
Do you know where we are on it?
we're talking about the
Very
commission.
last provision.
Yeah,
What was I was reading a different
No,
part of
just the
legislation, I'm sorry.
concern that we're being consistent with the power that that recommendation, that more of a recommendation board, the Active Transportation Planning Commission, that we're not creating an issue where the Commissioner of Recreation wouldn't otherwise be able to move forward if for some reason that commission's not active or not meeting or, doesn't exist, that,
Yeah, I mean, I think by saying in coordination with, it probably leaves enough leeway. My concern with these sections is with D and F, and even, maybe it's just with, oh yeah, and with A of this section. Regulation of parking and traffic is really outside the bailiwick of the Commissioner of Recreation in the regular course of business. That's much more a chief of police or traffic engineering issue. So I would probably prefer to see one of those people have that duty rather than the Commissioner of Recreation. I mean, yes, they are parks, and parks are under the jurisdiction of the Commission of Recreation, but we're specifically talking about, roadway and vehicle and traffic, things like that. So I would probably prefer to see, I guess, the chief of police have that power. But to answer your actual question, I think just by saying in coordination with the Active Transportation Planning Commission is probably okay because, I think that, I don't recall that commission's exact powers off the top of my head. I think they're mostly advisory anyway. So, as long as the chief of police or the Commissioner of Recreation is taking into consideration what the commission has to say, then I think we're okay.
well, yeah, and specific to parking, I mean, that just came up with the new engineering department.
Right.
Anyway, so I don't think we've bottomed that out.
We were completely open to, we had talked about who was the right person. I thought we had talked about it with you, and somebody settled on, I don't think Councilmember Zamer or I care about who, that's not the part of that section that we care about, and then if there's a different place that should go to, I think that we could note that and still move it forward through committee. But I will defer to you on that, Brett.
Okay.
Anything?
yeah, I agree. It's specifically about regulating parking during special events.
It was definitely a discussion point with someone in the administration, and it was, because this is, I mean, if you wanted to say you got to talk to Louis Swire, the statue, we would be cool with that.
Don't tempt me.
Councilmember Keegan?
Yeah. Yeah.
My interpretation of E, right, that's what we're talking about, and the reason why it made some sense to me that it would be under recreation is because you're talking about opening up those park roadways for people to be provided instruction in non-motorized vehicles. So, for example, if the Department of Recreation wanted to do a skateboarding clinic in Washington Park, they would be able to be the ones to designate that it can take place on a particular day and time. Same thing if they wanted to do a learn how to ride your bike clinic. That's how I interpreted that section. In the way that it was written, so it made sense to me that recreation would be the entity that would coordinate that.
Maybe one comment that I have a number of comments I was going to make after council members made their comments, but it might be worth pointing out here as well that as I read this current version of the law, we're saying in E that the commissioner shall set up times basically when instruction in the use of non-motorized vehicles is allowed. The current version of the law doesn't actually say anywhere that that's not allowed. We changed it to say, no part of Washington or Lincoln Parks shall be used for a place of instruction in the use of any, and we added the word motor vehicle. So it used to be any vehicle, you couldn't undertake instruction in those parks. We added the word motor vehicle, so nowhere in the law does it say you can't do instruction of non-motorized vehicles in Washington and Lincoln Parks. But then E comes in and says that we're going to designate these times when it's allowed, so.
We could, I mean, I would be very comfortable striking section E, and I don't think that that would change the intent of the legislation. I still would be very comfortable moving it through committee.
Yeah, I mean, that probably solves that issue.
Ed has his hand up, FYI.
Oh, go ahead.
I'd prefer it to be struck as well, because it is rather confusing whether, you mentioned talking about groups, but in here it doesn't say groups. So if I were to take my wife out and say, you're learning how to use an e-bike here, let's do it in Washington Park, so where it's safe.
We're so
if
lucky
it's
to
just
have
one
the
person.
chief of police here who will
So,
also weigh in on this. Who knew that you were talking about two different things today?
Yeah. And
Feel free to sit at you can be any council member you'd like and just turn on the mic.
So just for process purpose, the closing of roads and parking fall under my office in consultation with traffic engineering. In the case of the parks, we would also consult with the Commissioner of Parks and Recreation. But at the end of the day, closing roadways, changing parking, that all would fall under me. So we would coordinate it, but it would still fall under me.
So it might be that it might be something that first section A does need to be the chief of police.
I mean, we could codify essentially what the chief just said and say the chief of police in consultation with the Department of, with traffic engineering and the Commissioner of Recreation, if we wanted to, formalize that structure.
I think it would make, I mean, I would, and I still will say I do feel comfortable still passing it through committee because the intent of the legislation is still pretty intact with these amendments, as long as my colleagues would still be comfortable with that. And I will say I've looked over at Councilmember Ballerin several times, and he's been here for nearly the entire meeting, and I have not yet recognized him. Thank you for coming, and he is here officially on the record. Anything else?
I did have a few other things,
Go
if
ahead.
council members are all set. All right, under the definitions section, the definition of light electric vehicle includes such as electric bikes, but then we also have bicycles with electric assist as defined, which are defined by state law in the VTL. I guess I'm wondering, and I'm happy to be educated on this, whether there's a difference between quote-unquote electric bikes and bicycles with electric assist.
Just regarding not drafting that, that was used to sort of condense everything else elsewhere in the code. So it's lumping all of those in with light electric vehicles.
Okay.
Just for cleaner code later on.
Yeah, in general, I'd like to express my vehement opposition to the removal of the phrase velocipede from this legislation.
I will say, although all-wheeled vehicles that are human-powered are very specifically encouraged to be on the roadway, I was very open to the idea that if you were actually on a velocipede, you could go anywhere you wanted, because they're very difficult to maneuver.
You've earned the right. Councilmember Conti kind of expressed this, but the council did go and amend and liberalize the rules regarding skateboards a few years ago. Some things in here might be a little contradictory to that legislation from the beginning of this council when it comes to allowing skateboards to ride on sidewalks, things like that.
Well, that legislation we just removed, there's now no rules
Right,
about
so I guess we're
skateboards.
sort of reimposing some rules on skateboarding, which.
Yes, we absolutely, I
necessarily
mean, there was
bad
always
thing.
the intent to have rules for skateboards. It's just that the rules that we had, the people that were upset about skateboards didn't want that version. It was always the intent to work through this so that there were rules on, I mean, on anything that goes on a sidewalk. I mean, really, on a sidewalk, the pedestrian should be the right-of-way, and they should be the ones that are deferred to. And so currently, there is not anything, but there certainly should be something, and this does give a structure for something.
The prior one had the geographic limitations, but aside from that, there was also the separate provisions that related to, I think it was a prohibition on sidewalks.
I think so.
And I think some people argue that you shouldn't at least leave that in, but
Oh, yeah.
everything was erased.
So the prior one just had a prohibition on skateboards on sidewalks in a very specific geographic area. Everywhere else, there was no rules on
And
skateboards.
I think it was
No,
a
it's
broader,
Definitely
I
the
think it was
case.
within a geographic area, but there was also general on
Nope.
sidewalks.
There is not. You could ride a skate,
well,
I promise you, we went through it
Anyway, it's not here
backwards
now,
and
so
forwards.
we won't talk about it, but I
Regardless.
remember that distinction.
So, okay, yeah, I think that probably makes sense then, that we're reimposing some restrictions on skateboards, which, you know, there's a separate item of legislation that's been sitting in committee for a while on that, so this is a different way to address some of that. Section 359-4, we have the title as riding on sidewalks prohibited, semicolon, exceptions. The actual language of the section itself never actually prohibits riding on sidewalks. In fact, it sort of assumes that you can do it under certain circumstances. I think the way to address that would be to say, Section A can stay, pedestrians shall have the right of way on all sidewalks. Section B perhaps should be amended to say, it is prohibited for human propelled devices to ride on sidewalks except when, just to, you know, bring it in line with the actual title of the section. And then I think Councilmember Conti also touched on this, and, you know, it's not necessarily something that needs to be changed, just something to bear in mind that operation on an adjacent roadbed is unsafe. Unsafe, obviously, is a very subjective phrase here. You know, in the very unlikely event that somebody actually gets a ticket for this, the court would have to determine what the word unsafe means, and how on earth do you do that, you know. It's very open to interpretation, but I don't know whether there is a more precise way to phrase it, or whether it's even worth trying to phrase it more precisely, given how infrequently this is probably going to.
Yeah, I
end up
mean,
being an issue.
I personally would prefer to, because the other thing is, I would argue a 3-year-old on a bicycle, it is never safe for them to ride on the road.
Yeah.
And I would say that, you know, there are times that somebody is very comfortable riding in the road where I am not. So the perception of safety is a different thing, and it should be. I think that that's okay. Because, and also, if you're 30 and you're learning to ride a bicycle, you might be scared about doing it in the roadway. Although you can in the Lincoln and Washington Park roadways now. But it's, I like that subjective side of it. I think that what we need is to work with our advocates to actually come up with really articulating and sharing what this means. And I do like saying that it is prohibited, because we should be encouraging people to ride on the road with the understanding that safety comes first, and as long as you are being a considerate person, you can feel safe when you're riding your bicycle. But, you know, if you're learning to ride a bike, you're going to feel unsafe in the road. And as the parent, I would feel unsafe with my kid learning to ride a bike in the road.
My 3.5-year-old the other day told me that she wasn't going to bother learning how to steer her scooter until she turns 4, so probably best to keep her out of the roadway. And then, where am I? In subsection C, there's a requirement that when users when, bikers, for example, encounter a pedestrian, users shall stop and dismount until operation with due care is possible. I mean, legally, I guess there's nothing wrong with that. Practically speaking, dismounting, to me, as somebody who does occasionally bike around, seems a little bit overkill.
I know. I actually do this, though. I was kind of the impetus for this because I actually do this. I think there are definitely situations where people could slowly go around the person, but I also think that when it comes to safety, the standard should be the comfort of the pedestrian. Now, are there situations, and Ed might want to weigh in on this, but are there situations where, I mean, realistically, again, I don't think anybody's going to be looking at the code and getting in the nitty-gritty of it. Some people will, and we appreciate those people. But that was completely my fault, because that's actually what I do as a bicyclist as a sidewalk. But
Yeah.
go ahead. Frank.
Yeah, actually, but when we were talking about it, my recommendation is you stop till the person's beyond 4 feet, dismount and walk your bicycle. Especially if you're in a crowded sidewalk, you have no business riding on it anyway. You can walk your bicycle and you're a pedestrian yourself, or go on the roadway. So I'd say you give people 3 options. But you stop and you wait for the pedestrians to go by, or pedestrian to go by. You dismount and walk your bicycle, or you go on the roadway.
Yeah, I guess choice A was sort of my point. We're requiring people to dismount here. I think just requiring somebody to stop and move off the sidewalk would be sufficient without requiring them to actually
Yeah,
get off the
to-
bike and
yeah.
get back on.
Yeah, the dismounting was only saying dismount if you're going to walk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that the nuance of that, I don't know how, I think we can keep that as is. I personally like it being the concept of saying, listen, you need to stop your bike.
Yeah.
And
If I
it
get a
becomes
ticket
an
for not
issue in the
dismounting, I'm
future, if Rose is not dismounting her bike,
I believe that's called falling off. Okay, so moving on, 359.7. This already exists in the law the way it's written. I'm looking at what used to be C and is now B. It says $1,000 fine, civil. What are we calling it? A civil penalty of $1,000. And then also, such violation shall be a traffic infraction punishable in accordance with Section 1800 of the VTL. I mean, 1800 of the VTL for a first offense, the fine can be up to $150 and 15 days in jail. For a third offense or more within 18 months.
this is what we changed because of all this is what we did because of all the ATVs and things. That's why we have that
Is that
penalty
from the
there.
ATV legislation? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And I would like to keep that as
Yeah, we should
is.
keep that in place
And
then.
I'm sure having Chief Cox here, who would also not like us to change that back.
Yep, don't want to touch that. Yeah, and then back to 251.7. I think the only thing I didn't address in that section, in subsection A, it says no vehicles shall be permitted to either stand, congregate, or loiter upon the driveways of these parks. Actually, 2 points here. One, we
Wait,
refer to,
I'm sorry, where are you, Brett?
this is 251.7, so at the end of the
Oh,
legislation,
251.7.
where we were before.
Sorry. Okay.
2 points here. Actually, no, strike that, sorry. 1 point here. No vehicle shall be permitted to either stand, congregate, or loiter upon the driveways of these parks. Read literally, that means cars can't park in parks.
This is our current law, so.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess it says no animals, bicycle, tricycles, or motors or vehicles. So, yeah, it is our current law, but again, I think read literally that prohibits parking, so maybe we say notwithstanding any other provision of law or something like that.
I am absolutely fine with that. I mean,
Quick question.
the driveways of these parks, it's just talking about the parks. It doesn't say just driveways.
Upon the
Yes,
driveways of
sorry.
these parks.
Go ahead, Mr. Hernandez.
don't know if this impacts it at all, but the residential parking permit system encapsulates Washington Park. I don't know how much
Yeah, I mean,
of
there's
Lincoln
still,
Park.
you
if
can
any.
still park your car in Lincoln Park, though, for example. You know, and I guess is the road through Lincoln Park a driveway of the park? Probably. I'm just using those two examples. I mean, there's probably other parks that you,
I mean, I will say, I don't want to hold up this legislation because of an existing provision of law that doesn't make sense.
so, like I
But-
said, if we slap a notwithstanding any other provision of law on there, I think that
Sure. Where
Probably.
would you like that?
just, right at the beginning of that subsection, probably. 251(7)A, yeah, notwithstanding any other provision of law, no vehicle shall be permitted to stand, dot, dot, dot.
And we are adding at the end of that, that's the place that we're adding in,
As may be specially designated by the chief of police in consultation with traffic engineering and the commissioner of recreation. And then we are nixing, I think we're in subsection D, we're also changing that to the chief and then adding traffic engineering.
sure, and then that is also the D, subsection D also has
Right.
the chief of police
Yep.
in consultation with,
And then I think we're nixing subsection E, correct?
and we are, yes.
Okay. So staff and I can work together to make those changes prior to,
And is it director of traffic? Like, what do we say?
I-
Department of Traffic?
we'll have to figure out
Department of
what,
Engineering? I mean, I don't know that you want that on your
engineering.
place.
it's the
That's how
Department
it's
of,
gonna be,
okay.
yeah, that's how it's gonna be under the,
We'll figure out exactly who that
Statute.
should be.
Oh, sorry, some
The
future
division, is it the Division of Traffic Engineering within? okay, maybe-
division of,
maybe we'll
yes,
say the Division
there
of
we go.
Traffic Engineering.
Division of Traffic and Engineering. Anything else? Okay. I want to articulate the specific changes. Apologies to everybody, we're almost done. So the amendments that we would be making with this legislation is in section 359-4, subsection B. We're adding, it is prohibited for bicycles or other human-propelled devices to be operated on a sidewalk except when, and then keeping the rest. Then we move along to the last section, which is section 251-7. And subsection A, we have notwithstanding any provision of law, comma, vehicles,
Probably notwithstanding any provision of law to the contrary.
to the contrary. So notwithstanding any provision of law to the contrary, comma, vehicles shall be permitted to either stand, congregate, or loiter, blah, blah, blah. We get until the very end where we add, on such occasions as may be specially designated by the Chief of Police in consultation with the Division of Traffic and Engineering and the Commissioner of Parks of Recreation. Then we go down to subsection D, and it is amended to say, the Chief of Police, in consultation with Division of Traffic and Engineering and the Commissioner of Recreation, shall regulate blah, 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 and we are striking subsection E.
I just have one quick question.
Yes.
I still don't understand why we wouldn't just say the Department of Engineering. Because that's
Because
how
I
it's
think it-
codified under that statute.
Because I think that it's really important to have traffic in there in case there is a change to the Department of Engineering. Traffic was, until about a year ago, with APD, and who knows where traffic will be in the future, and it might be something where it's just weird that we're just referring it to engineering and not traffic. So I do think it's important to have traffic in there. because we're not actually interested in, although we'd love for Howard to weigh in on a million things, we don't actually need Howard to weigh in on traffic. We need somebody that works in his department to weigh in on traffic, so that is why. So with that, could I get a motion? Oh, and yes, if the drafting edits could be made, that would be appreciated. With that, could I get a motion to move it through the committee with the amendments?
Motion to move ordinance 24-81-24 out of committee as amended with the bill drafting edits with a favorable recommendation.
Seconded by Councilmember Anane. All in favor? Aye, that is unanimous. Thank you so much. Ed, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for your patience, everyone. We are now moving on to Local Law L of 2024. A local law amending Article 1, Employee Residency Requirement of Chapter 62, Labor of the Code of the City of Albany in relation to broadening the employee residency requirement. We do have several speakers, and I'm sure some have not signed up, but I will call them in order, and then anybody that is not signed up that would like to speak, don't worry, I would love to have you speak. So Anne Marie Salmon.
All right, so thank you, council members, for considering this legislation, and I also want to thank you for your partnership over the years. You have been an incredible partner with helping us recruit and retain staff. I think starting back with the pay study and looking to help us with compensation, and then helping us pass budgets to do that, as well as the Joint Albany grant that you passed through the ARPA program. So thank you. I really appreciate everything you've been doing the last few years with us. But even with those steps forward, we're still having a challenge. You've heard about it, filling some of the critical vacancies. I know some of the commissioners will be speaking to their particular departments. We're really having a challenge on some of the critical roles like accountants, engineers, 911 operators, equipment operators, a lot of those specialized fields. And I think we have very significant vacancies and sometimes a higher than average turnover rate. Some of that's due to the competition with the state. For example, the state just passed some incentives to pay their engineers more, so they're kind of starting to poach. We have kept pace, but it's just always competitive for the scarce roles. We also compete on the HELPS program. It's becoming easier to move and jump ship here. And I think the other really critical thing that's made it different and why we were looking at this moment in time for the residency change is the housing market. I think everyone in this room agrees that we're in a housing crisis regionally. I think rentals, home ownership, everything in that whole area, it's very, very challenging to recruit people to come in on a one-year waiver. I think people upending their lives, leaving stable housing situations and a different home, they're not wanting to do it. I even, my staff who does rent in the city, some of my employees have been looking for houses for 2 years, have made multiple offers that, they're outbid. I think at this point it's just very challenging to ask people to move in at this moment in time. So, we're looking for a little bit of a reprieve here. I think one of the great things about this proposed legislation is a residency preference. All things equal, I think everyone can agree that we want to hire residents. You have a different maybe orientation towards your day when you're receiving those services. I don't disagree with that at all. We're just looking for a preference when it comes to residency. So on a competitive test, which is 75% of our jobs, things like the big exams for police and fire, but also we do have exams for accountants, we have exams for engineers, we have engineers for financial managers. Doing a canvas of the residency preferred list, and then once that list has been exhausted, we would move to the non-resident list. I very much support that change. So I think the big thing is that you know, we have to deliver the services to our residents, and at this point, we're just not able to do it. I know Howard's here, he can talk about some of his vacancies. I definitely have concerns about some of our major projects moving forward if we can't get the staff, and people are just reluctant to move for a one-year waiver. So I look forward to working with you on this, and I really appreciate your partnership. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for all that you've done, not just in hiring, but across the departments. You're appreciated. Howard Goebel.
Yeah, thank you, council members. Really want to echo what Anne Marie had to say, but really focus on technical positions, engineers specifically. I have two licensed engineers who work in my department who, one within a week and one within 6 weeks, will no longer be in our employ. And I've been working in Albany for the past 25 years. I have a very good pulse of state workers, local workers, private sector. Everyone's looking for engineers, and no one can fill their positions, and they've tried throwing piles of money at people, benefits, all sorts of incentives, and they're still struggling. Having a residency requirement within the city of Albany makes our job even tougher to fill these vacancies, and it really puts an issue on the continuity of service. We have a lot of projects underway, a lot of great leadership prior to my tenure here, and ongoing that we need people to do the work, and they just don't run themselves, and the only way our work can be successful is ensuring that we have Albany staff members out there on site overseeing these works, so when there's issues, problems, things go awry, that we have folks in place to ensure that we don't have a disruption in service. And certainly we have a lot of great work going on and really want to continue that. But continuity of our workforce and retaining our workforce is really such an important thing, and I support the residency requirement bill that you guys have worked so hard to develop, and hope that we can come to some agreement on it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Brendan Cox. Chief Cox.
Good evening again. So, council members, thank you for having us in tonight, and thank you for looking at this legislation. Since I've come back, the biggest challenge that I've seen is in our staffing. And while the concentration that everybody's looked at is our staffing for our sworn, this is not a challenge that I have for our sworn, because our sworn personnel aren't required to live in the city per state law. However, we have a huge challenge when it comes to our non-sworn and our telecommunication workers as well. And that does, the residency requirement does affect them. And right now, I have a number of positions that are unfilled in our non-sworn and telecommunications units that are having a direct effect on public safety. Telecommunications, right now we are 19 positions short in telecommunications. We're supposed to have 38 people. That number is having a direct effect on the amount of calls for service that can get answered when people call 911. Our non-emergency number goes to a phone tree. That's not acceptable. And the number of people that dispatch police, fire, and EMS calls are overwhelmed. Our 911 calls, as it is, if they don't get answered by our people, they then get transferred, and this is a joint agreement, and this is not unusual, but they get transferred to the town of Colony. I've gotten no less than 3 calls from the chief of the town of Colony about the fact that calls are getting rolled over to his people, causing him an issue with a workload issue in his town. When we look at our breakdown, the numbers from 2019 to 2024, our applicant pool for telecommunications continues to go down. It's been about half and half for non-residents and residents. But when I look at the overall number of applicants, We've hired about 38 people since 2019. Only 8 people of those 38 are still employed. So we have obviously a retention issue. And when we talk to our applicants, when we go to hire people, many of those applicants wind up declining the position. And when they decline it, many of them decline it because of the residency requirement, and they talk about the cost of housing, and they talk about uprooting their families. Now, I agree 100% that we want to hire Albany residents, and I agree 100% that having people live here, work here, that live here is what we would all like to see. But we have to tackle this issue. And I think that we could get to the number that we need to get by opening up residency with the legislation that you ultimately have drafted, by still giving preference to city residents. We have to ultimately tackle that. So I fully support what you have drafted. I think it will help us get to what we need to get to. And again, I think we then need to find unique ways to then give incentives for folks to live into the city once we employ them, and make sure that we do something different. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Rebecca Caldone.
My name is Rebecca Caldon. I'm the managing engineer for the City of Albany Water Department. I'm here on behalf of Commissioner Joe Coffey, who's out of town this week. I'm coming to strongly support Local Law L 2024, expanding the residency footprint for employment eligibility for our employees will overcome a lot of the lack of applications we've had at the Water Department. Since the introduction of the residency requirement in 2014, we've had a decrease in applicants overall, and that has been exacerbated since the COVID-19 pandemic. We saw a further drop in applicants at that time. I do have our current postings and our 2024 postings and the amount of time that those postings have been open, and I can share that with you after I speak. The most challenging position for us, and probably the reason I'm really here, is our licensed professional engineer position. 2 of those opened up approximately 2 years ago. One of those positions has been open for over 500 days without a single applicant. And one of those positions I have since downgraded to a junior engineer position because that does not require a professional engineering license. We have gotten an applicant that took over 50 days to receive an application, and I haven't actually gotten to interview that person, so I'm not even 100% sure that they're going to be appropriate for that job. So that's just our challenge within our engineering side. Furthermore, for 2024, we show that we have 19 postings, an average time posted of 65 days before we were able to fill that job. 6 of those jobs took more than 80 days to fill, and one of our blue-collar water maintenance repairman positions took 160 days to fill. So struggling to fill these positions that are vital to our operations and maintenance of water and sewer, it prevents us, so this maintenance really prevents emergencies from occurring. Emergencies cause water outages to our residents, and it's important to us to prevent that from happening, but not having these essential operations workers is keeping us from that process. We also, and then additionally with the engineering and some of the administrative positions, we've also had a hard time filling the administrative positions for our finance department. Both of those positions have really hindered our ability to execute our capital plan, which has been extensive the last 10 years. Between the finance department and the engineering department, we are extremely overwhelmed by the amount of work because of our lack of employees and our lack of applicants at this point. So the passage of Local Law L 2024 will help mitigate that failure to find applicants for us, and will help us deliver this critical service to the residents of Albany the way we should be. And would you like me to hand these out? Do you want me to give them to you, Jenny, or?
Brian is very kindly dealing with it for both of us, which we appreciate him for doing things like that all the time. Is there anybody else here that would like to come speak? Go ahead.
Just quickly from the law department perspective, we run into these issues as well. You know, despite the fact that there is a law school here in Albany, they are specialized licensed positions, and even frankly for support staff and paralegal positions, you know, since they require specialized training, it's a smaller pool of people we can pick from. You know, we don't tend to get a ton of applicants either for support staff or attorney positions, and I can think of offhand 3 or 4 times where we've made an offer to somebody who doesn't live in the city of Albany, and they've turned it down because of the residency requirement. You know, if you go to work for the state, which has a zillion attorney openings, you get slightly better pay and you don't have a residency requirement, so it's another thing we have to compete against. And I'm sure Rob and Judge Franchini could probably, you know, speak with even greater detail on those issues, but yeah, they certainly affect the law department as well.
Mr. Gallen, come forward.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to Council members Anane and Ballerin for introducing this legislation. I know that it has been a ongoing conversation for several years, and I just wanted to speak on behalf of the mayor regarding the residency requirement. Back in 2015, I know the mayor was one of the most vocal proponents of creating this residency requirement, and it's obviously not. It's been something that we've been very proud of. I think through COVID, coming to realize that a variety of factors that you've heard about from the various departmental representatives have made it clear that certain positions, particularly some of the more technical positions, the ones that require certain degrees, have become harder and harder to fill. I think Brett spoke also to the state, which we've been able to avert some of that issue by having the pay study that we went through to raise some of the salaries for city employees. I think the other thing to note is that Albany County, I forgot how long they waived their requirement, but they did waive their requirement for a period of time. So not only were we competing with the state of New York, but we're competing with the county, and then obviously organizations across the region. But again, just wanted to express, obviously it's something that we have taken a very hard look at. It's something that we don't suggest lightly. We're very proud that that a large portion of the employees that work for the city are residents of the city, and that obviously an overwhelming majority of those who have been hired since 2015 are residents of the city of Albany. But we're also, we're dealing with the various factors that organizations across the region are facing every day, and we have some of these critical positions, particularly the dispatchers, engineers. The list goes on, where we are struggling to find people to come work for the city, and there are people who have told us that they will apply, but for the residency requirement because of a variety of reasons, whether family issues, whether they own a home in another municipality, knowing that it's going to be hard to buy a home or find an affordable home in the city. So again, we don't suggest this lightly. It is not something that we wanted to do. It's taken several years to get to this point, but we very much encourage the council to be able to pass an amendment to the residency requirement that will allow for more of a preference of city employees, but also give department heads the ability to look outside the city if they can't find a qualified candidate within the city. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And Councilmember Anane, did you want to say anything?
Thank you, Chair. In 2015, the residency requirement were created under our current mayor as a way to encourage more city workers to live in the city. And at that time, I don't think they could have predicted a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic to happen. But it's something that many people support, and I still support it, when I joined the council. This local law will modify the residency requirement to allow department heads to hire employees who live in Albany, Rensselaer, and Schenectady County. Quite frankly, has been a challenge, as many have spoken about before. For many city officers to fill positions with qualified applicants, this law will broaden the pool of qualified applicants by allowing prospective qualified employees to live outside of the city. On a personal note, short staffing has been a chronic issue, and I've heard from many of city staff, but also heard from many of my constituents. And I believe that, with the chronic issue, which increases the workload on our existing workforce, as well as also costing high overtime costs. So financially, it's also becoming a burden, being short staff. And I know that the council have really led on making sure that, we're paying our staff the appropriate to be able to compete. But some things that we always try to keep in mind is that morale within some of these departments. And when you have staff are working overtime hours day in and day out, it becomes a burden. And I believe that this legislation is a step in the right direction to make sure that we have more staff so we don't increase overtime pay, particularly, which is costing the city as a whole. This legislation, quite frankly, is a common sense approach to make it more flexible for potential applicants to apply for positions without the residency requirement being too much of a burden. Again, as was mentioned, this legislation will still give priority to city residents for jobs that require a competitive exam. This bill also requires the city to create a preferred certification list, and those who live outside of the city will not be considered for those roles until that list is exhausted. Again, this bill will still require department heads. I know there are some people that have some concerns about department heads living outside. This bill will still require department heads to live in the city of Albany. So I just want to thank another thing too is that nothing in this legislation that we're making right now with the amendments will require individuals whose residency met the requirements under the older version of this chapter, not included waivers from the Board of Residency to move residency to stay in competitive with this section. So again, I believe that this is a step in the right direction. The county has waived it and they're still struggling to hire people. So I believe that it's fiscally responsible and also the right thing to do at this time that we're in. Thank you.
Councilmember Ballerin, do you want to say anything?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councilman Anani, for bringing this forward and the work you've done on this. It's really appreciated. Look, I'm someone that's a strong believer in, making sure our residents get the first dibs. I believe in recycling our resources. So I am a strong believer of keeping it in-house, meaning if we have opportunities for employment, we should be, hiring City of Albany residents first. And I think this bill allows for that, but there has to be a balance with what we're seeing in the current state. It has to understand that, when a resident is calling 911, they don't care where the person who picks up lives. They just care that somebody picks up. When someone turns on their water and gets water to drink, they don't care who are the engineers and who has worked on keeping their water safe. They just want to make sure their water is safe. So, I know it's not an easy lift, but I do think we have to look at how we can better serve our residents. And by allowing ourselves to have a more open pool for people to be able to apply, for us to be able to retain staff, it's going to hopefully make sure that our residents get the services that they need. I'll be honest, when I'm hearing that we're 19 short and our 911 telecommunication staff, that's 50%. That's a 50% of openness. Now, I thought it was bad when they came during the budget cycle and they were at 30% vacancies. And that was in October. So since October, it's gone to 50%. And it's also important to note that's after we reduced the total number of positions 3 years ago. And for those who remember, about 4 years ago, we brought in a consultant and we did a study to see if we were properly staffed. And they recommended that we increase the staffing. And we did. And we increased the staffing, I think it was 3 or 4 positions. And then the following year, we couldn't fill them. We had so many vacancies that it was recommended that we cut 2 positions because we weren't going to be able to fill all the vacancies that we had. So if we really look at where we were recommended by our consultants who we brought in years ago to tell us how we were properly staffed, we're actually even below where we should be, 50% below where we should be to be properly staffed. So I know it's not an easy vote. I know it's not an easy position to take. It doesn't sound good, but I think if we are looking to try to make sure we have the best services and the best safety for our residents, it's a hard vote that we need to take. And I do hope that the committee is able and willing to take a vote on this today, because I think we're in an urgent position, just looking at how the numbers have even widened since October. And I know many of my colleagues are on the Finance Committee, also on the Law Committee. So you heard this being an issue. You heard that this was something that we needed to address, and I'm hoping we can get this moving forward so we can hopefully try to fill some of those vacancies. But thank you again to Councilman Anani, and thank you again, Chair, and the committee for taking this on.
What I was wondering, and then I was wondering if, because I have questions, and I'm assuming my colleagues might, that it might be great for people in the audience to answer. So if you would be somebody that's willing to answer questions, come on up and maybe sit in one of our seats. And everyone is welcome. But there is no pressure to. You are, of course, welcome to stay where you are, and then you can, if you want to jump up because you hear something, you can do that too. But yeah, just make sure you're in a place where there's a microphone, so that, because we definitely have to talk into the microphones to ensure that we are officially on the record. So thank you all so much for being willing to answer questions too, and being part of the whole conversation. Councilmember Keegan.
I just sort of have one question, and I'm not even sure how we'd really resolve this, but was it the intention to sort of leave the non-competitive sort of appointed positions in that gray area where there's no preferred list, and therefore by how I interpret the statute, we wouldn't give preferential treatment to hiring within the city for the, what is it, roughly 25% of city personnel that don't fall into a competitive class role. And again, I don't know how linguistically we would resolve that either, but it was really the major question I had with this particular piece of legislation, because it's very clear that the department heads are defined and what the responsibility is for department heads. But then there's sort of this cohort of employees that aren't really clearly specified in the law how we're dealing with them in terms of residency.
So this is something Councilmember Farrell and I were talking about prior to the meeting, and I don't think it was intentional to leave a whole group out, but I think one of the things that came up was, there's very objective criteria when there's a testable list that you're just pulling the scores with a resident list and a non-resident list. We can certainly add in a preference for other civil service classifications. There's the non-competitive, those are jobs like, painters, carpenters, laborers. There's the exempt, and I think there's a labor class for some entry-level jobs. We can look at it. We'll just have to determine on an administrative services, civil service side of things, how we parse out those residency preferences. Sometimes you might have a candidate come in with 20 years experience, non-resident, a candidate with 1 year experience, resident. So how are we going to kind of look at those, all the qualifications together? I think we can come up with something together. But it will take a minute on the administrative side once it is implemented.
And again, I don't necessarily want to hold up this bill moving to address that. It's just, to me, sort of a big question mark that I think is important for us to clarify at some point, whether it's going to be promulgated rules or what have you, works for administrative services and for the rest of the council body. But that was my one major concern in reading through this, was that there's a huge cohort, and the last thing that I would want to, and those are the jobs that elected officials tend to have a lot of control over who gets them, because they're not competitive class and they're not necessarily relegated to the same civil service rules as our competitive class positions are. So I do think that we should address it at some point in how we're dealing with this.
I agree, and I would personally like a preference on all of those roles. One of the things we have to consider in making administrative rules is, say you had 6 lawyers apply for a job, 4 are non-residents, 2 are residents, and the non-residents are the ones with municipal government legal experience. How do I weigh that against residency? I think we can come up with something, but as you get into the specialties, that's what's always really challenging. So we will have to look at how this could come into play. But we're supportive of looking at a preference for across all titles.
Any other, Councilmember Plenty, do you have questions? I have some questions. So, and I will say I fully understand, and I also deeply appreciate everyone coming in this evening to talk about this and giving us your input. We are clearly in a crisis situation, and we completely understand that. Hiring is difficult everywhere. Housing is difficult everywhere, and you do need to change what you're doing to ensure that you're getting people in. With that being said, the housing market and the hiring market does ebb and flow. So to make something permanent, I do think it's important to have discussions behind them. Because I do strongly believe in hiring city residents. One of the biggest issues that we have in the city of Albany is we have a revenue problem. And one of our big revenues, our largest revenue, is property taxes. The idea that we are putting money out that is outside the city, paying property taxes outside the city, doesn't make a lot of sense. And it's also something where, as a council, one of the ways that it was discussed that when we were talking about doing the payroll study and hiring and raising the salaries, these were city residents, and we knew we were hiring city residents. So it was something where we were also investing back in the city, investing in the people that live here, and making sure that, and we should be paying a good wage regardless. I've never loved that municipalities are, you don't get paid as much. But it's part of being, it's part of investing in our city, and it's also part of being very firm on taxpayer dollars. I can say when I get pushback from my constituents because we get pushback about our taxes all the time. And we get pushback about salaries. When those salaries increased, I know I got a lot of pushback from constituents. I know my colleagues did. I was able to say, we hire people in the city of Albany. Those are your friends, those are your neighbors, those are people that you send your kids to school with. Those are the people that live down the street. When this goes through, I can't say that anymore. I can say they live in a contiguous county. That doesn't have the same ring. I'm not saying that we shouldn't move forward with this, but I am saying that we should do it carefully, because it does matter to have people that we're paying live in the city and pay property taxes in the city, and we cannot lose sight of that just because we are in a current situation where hiring and housing is difficult. It ebbs and flows. Before I was on the school board, there was more teachers than you could possibly imagine. Like they were turning teachers away. Now they can't hire teachers. So it ebbs and flows. And when we do legislation, we don't do legislation for the moment that you're in. We do legislation for whether it's an ebb or whether it's a flow. So it has to be a combination of the two. I don't understand, so from my perspective, I don't know why we have any location preference. Like, why does it matter whether it's like, because it's Albany County or a county within the state contiguous. So like, why does it matter whether it's Saratoga County or, I mean, if somebody wants to come from Warren County, I don't know why that, if we're saying like you're just being around, like why does it matter?
That followed public officers law and mirrored basically what fire and police are held to, as well as certain other appointed positions. So we just kind of copied that state language that governs some of our other positions here.
Because, I mean, from my perspective, if we're going to open this up, I don't know why we would limit ourselves. If somebody wants to drive from Glens Falls and they have a great resume, then why is that not okay versus somebody that is in Latham? You know, there's no benefit to the city of Albany whether you live in Rensselaer County or Saratoga County or Warren County, or even if you live in Idaho, like, and you fly in. It's like, obviously that would be terribly environmental, but other than that, I don't know why we would, if we need to keep this open, then why are we limiting ourselves geographically at all?
And we could obviously take that out. That was really the intent, was just to kind of have that consistent language that's definitely in the fire and police postings per state law that we can remove.
And then there are one of the things, and this is just a separate thing, I completely understand when we're talking about the specialty positions, because that can be, there's a great argument to be made whether it's an ebb or a flow. You could have a ton of people looking for jobs. There will be specialty positions, particularly in engineering and in law and engineering as well, that it doesn't matter. It's going to be hard to hire those positions, and I do understand that. But there's a lot of positions that it's going to go the other way, and there's hiring issues everywhere. Why do we think that changing the residency requirement is going to solve the problem for those positions?
So I can speak a little bit to that. So I don't think it's going to solve all of our problems, right? I mean, I think there's still other things we need to do. But, and this goes to your first point. I don't disagree with the point you have to say about the taxpayer pool, you know, the tax pool and that. But a lot of the positions we're talking about, the overwhelming majority of them are all positions that are under $50,000 a year. So if we're talking about somebody who lives outside of Albany now, applies for this job, they already have housing somewhere else, their partner has a job outside the city, their children are already in school, we're not talking about an amazing amount of money for all of a sudden, in this current market, for them to then turn around and go, okay, we're going to move from an apartment or from a house where we have our stable incomes able to pay that and move to what is currently more of an unstable market for them, and comparably, for them to do that. So that is one of the pieces of feedback we're getting. Because again, we're not talking about none of the jobs, both, you know, I stuck with the telecommunications, but, you know, I'm also talking about community aides and matrons. I mean, we're talking about jobs in the mid-30s. So those are jobs that somebody might say, hey, yeah, I'm okay. I mean, we're a city of 24 square miles, or a county of whatever, you know, 300 square miles. So, I mean, somebody to drive across the bridge who's, you know, living in Latham, but their apartment's much cheaper and they're already, you know, they're a two-income family, whatever it might be, they don't have, it's not going to be overwhelming for them to then say, I now have to move. It's easier for them to go ahead and take that position instead of saying, I can't do that because we're not in a position to move. And I think it's because we're talking about jobs that aren't, hey, I'm making 6+ figures and like, yeah, I can rent a house I can rent a house or an apartment, or I can buy a house and take care of that. And I think that's where we also have to say, well, now we're going to talk about folks that are spending their money while they're in the city. They're going to eat their lunch here, they're going to stay afterwards, they're going to, you know, do things like that. So I empathize with those other points, but I also think we're not talking about a salary range that are folks that are going to be like, sure, now I'm going to come in and I'm going to be able to do what we want them to be able to do.
No, I definitely appreciate it. Mr. Gallen? Did you want to add something to that specific thought, and then?
Yeah, no, I just had some more observations and a question, whatever. One question, any other city, village, town within our region have a similar residency requirement that we know of?
I believe Schenectady either has recently removed or is removing theirs right now. I know there was legislation pending. Troy does not have one. The county removed theirs probably 18 months or 2 years ago. The trend,
I'm sorry, what do they do?
The trend is moving away from it.
They moved away, yep, okay. So my observation is, I mean, obviously, Albany is, we're a relatively small city. We're going up downstate, this is really a small city. That's part of a larger labor market. And we compete within that larger labor market, and it seems like what we're doing with the residency requirement is making our city itself an individual labor market, which doesn't have the pool necessary to support or hire for all the services that we need to provide. So on the one hand, you know, it's, if we were, I mean, this region could probably be a city in and of itself, but we're a small part of that larger labor market. We probably need to look at that larger labor market and mobility between different, you know, jobs, locations, et cetera. And I understand, you know, in terms of constituents concerned about whether or not their services or city employees live in the city or not, but I guess the trade-off is residency versus the ability to provide services. And then if you don't have the ability to hire because you have this residency requirement, then you potentially sacrifice services and you get complaints on services. And, you know, on the communications division in the police department, that's a major issue, concerned about. So I'm looking at it from all those perspectives, and I understand the concerns, you know, that when we did this, and I was here, when we initially did it for commissioners and then later expanded it to everyone else, the desire was to make sure that city workers lived in the city, they had a share, a stake in the city, but, you know, sometimes you need to re-examine that, and it's possible, I mean, after COVID, a lot of things have changed, and I don't know if that is one of the things that impacts the ability to hire right now, or that has contributed to the problems that we have. So just some observations, and you know, I was wondering how our requirement, again, fits with what other surrounding communities do. But you know, it is sometimes, if you're living like just outside of Cotton Colony and you want to take a job that's relatively moderate pay, you're not going to, and it's available here in the city, it's unreasonable to require someone.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Conti. I think it's a good comparison to do with the localities, but I think it's also good to look at similar cities. Syracuse and Buffalo both had a residency requirement, which they got rid of because the same issues that we were challenged with. A lot of sprawling work within their counties and suburban areas, and they had to make that decision just to keep, their words, not mine, keep the lights on. We had to, in Syracuse, mayor had to suspend the residency requirements because they just couldn't keep positions filled. And the same thing happened in Rochester as well. So when we look at these similar types, I think we're all struggling with the same sort of issues. I don't know that it's COVID alone, but I think that it's a thing that does play into it. I think it's a transformation of the aging workforce too, and where people really have chosen to reside versus where you grew up in Albany, you lived in Albany your whole life, and you went to work in the city. Things have changed. You went to school. My kids left. They go to school in a different state now, and they said, Dad, I'm not coming back. It's nothing to do with anything other than they like it warmer. And, you know, they don't like shoveling snow and really the climate, but I was hoping they'd come back and actually come back to Albany and work here. I think there's a lot of opportunities, but the demographic shift is a reality.
I will also observe, I mean, it is ideal to have employees live in the city, because when you do live in the city, I think you have, they have a stake, and they have, you know, care more for what's going on, I think. But we are where we are in terms of availability.
Mr. David Stowe, and then.
I think it's safe to speak for all the representatives of the administration here that I think we all agree that having people live in the city is the optimal goal, and something that those of us who do are proud of. To the point about the situation changing over time, I think back to 2015, I didn't work for the city then. I started in 2016, but I remember the job market here was a much different job market than it is now. And so I do think, you know, one suggestion to address some of those sentiments that we'd be open to is having a sunset provision in the legislation where, you know, either for 2 or 3 years to be able to have this option, see how it goes, see how things change over time. I mean, the way things are going, who knows what the job market will be in 3 days, but to at least give the opportunity for individuals who have expressed that they, you know, we have these positions that we can't fill. We have people who have said that they're interested in some of the positions if the residency requirement is loosened, to be able to see, you know, basically a sort of what we did with the trash fee, giving it a period of time to allow the market to happen, and then be able to reassess at a later date and not have it be a permanent fix that feels as though we can't change it.
Councilmember Ballerin.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So, a couple of things. It is hard to hire anywhere. And I do remember when I worked at the college, we got stacks like this of resumes. Everybody with a master's degree and years of experience. And nowadays, we're lucky if we get this, and we're lucky if we get people to actually even show up to interviews. We have had more and more, and people just not even show up to an interview. So I do think times have changed. I think we also have to recognize that this generation is different, and we have to accept it. The old generation, I'll even say my generation, we grew up with the mentality of, you know, work hard, move up the ladder. You know, the goal was the big office with the good view. That's not this generation's goal. This generation's goal is a laptop and a coffee shop, or if you're lucky, a laptop by the beach. And I don't think that's going to really shift a whole lot back to the old ways. And it might, but I think we need to be open that these jobs that we're looking to fill are not remote jobs, are not jobs that people can do remotely. So we have to be open to see how can we attract more people to our city, to work here, and to hopefully eventually move here. I mean, I would hope that this wouldn't mean that we don't want people to live in our city, to work in our city. We do. That's not the case. We just want to make it easier for us to attract more people. And I'm open to a sunset. I want to yield that to my colleague, Councilman Anani, who I know has worked very hard on this too. But I'd like for us to find a way to get this over the hill, so we can address the issues which we're facing today. Thank you.
Councilmember Anani, do you want to speak on a potential sunset?
Yeah, thank you everyone for spoken. I'm definitely open to a sunset provision for up to 3 years. I think it will give us the time to assess if this legislation is encouraging people to want to work for the city, or if we need to make an amendment moving forward. But I'm open to a sunset for 3 years.
Councilmember Keegan?
If we are going to do a sunset provision, is that going to impact the folks who may be hired over the course of 3 years, or will they be grandfathered in?
I think we'd have to grandfather them.
My concern would be if you were to revert back, who would accept a job if they would have to move in 3 years? I just think it's also important for us to consider the fact that, there was long predicted that we would have a significant labor shortage in the United States right around now, because we simply did not sufficiently replace the boomer population, and as they retired, we saw a significant delay to that prediction as a result of the recession in 2008. But I'm not sure that we're going to see substantial changes in the issues that all employers in the United States are facing in terms of workforce recruitment and retention, because we simply, just as we don't have enough housing right now, it's predicted that we're not going to have enough workers, and that is not going to significantly change, particularly as we crack down on things like immigration. So, I don't have a problem with us doing a sunset, provided anyone that's hired during that 3-year period is guaranteed to be able to maintain employment under the understanding that they accepted the job.
And I think
Does
that
Section 2 of the local law actually address that issue, the proposed? Does Section 2 of the...
Yeah, so that says,
that
nothing
issue?
in this section shall require an individual whose residency met the requirements under an older version of this chapter, not including waivers to the Board of Residency, to move residences to stay in compliance with this section. I think we could probably reword that a little bit to make it a little clearer that the version of the law under which you are hired is the version that will apply to your employment throughout the term of your employment. We can play with that language a little bit to make that clearer, but if we're going to impose a sunset, then, I think we want to, I think that's what that says, but we can phrase it in a way that makes that very clear. I did just have one other point I wanted to quickly make. With regard to the contiguity requirement, again, that was taken from state law, and as Anne-Marie said, that's the standard that applies to police and fire and some other positions. So I think the only potential issue with doing away with the contiguity requirement in this local law is then suddenly you would be creating a situation where police and fire and those other positions have a more stringent requirement than all other employees. I can't speak obviously to how police officers and firefighters would view that situation, but that is that would be the reality.
They had it. I'm not overly stressed about that. I mean, if people think that's a problem, but if we were having a hiring issue, I don't know why we would limit, like if we're going to open it up, then why, just from my own perspective.
I think in addition to the consistency argument, there's like the extreme flip side of do we want to have a situation where people could literally live in Idaho and work from home for the city of Albany? I would think the answer would be no, and therefore would want to have the
But
contiguous county.
wouldn't that be up to the people hiring? I mean, that's saying that like somebody that is in the administration is like, yes, I would love to hire somebody that lives in Idaho and have them work remotely.
Yes, and to be fair, for the next 9 months, I don't think that that's going to be the sentiment, but I
mean-
can't speak to whoever will be in the mayor's office in 2026, whether they're okay with that arrangement.
I'm happy to defer it. It's just, it's something where if we're changing the residency requirement because we're having issues hiring people because of location, I don't know why we would suddenly limit, because, I mean, my mom commuted from Glens Falls to Albany when she got a job for a few years, and then she was back up there. But like, it's not altogether weird to have somebody come from not, I mean, from an hour away. It's not, I just, you guys can do whatever you want with that. I just would say that if you actually feel like this is the problem, then you might not want to limit yourself.
You know, but on that point, if, and I don't know the different positions and the requirements and the distances, but if distance could be an issue for some positions, then if you open it up to anywhere, you can't use that as a criteria for hiring, you know what I'm saying? So, yeah, I mean, having this geographic provision, which is consistent with what we do with police and fire, and consistency does make sense, you do put kind of a geographic limitation on it. So if you don't have that, then, and if a certain position,
Wouldn't that come up in the hiring process? Like, I'm assuming if somebody has a distance provision when they're hiring, they're not going to, I'm assuming that would come up. I just, I mean, like
Yeah,
if there was something and like they were hiring like at DGS, a snowplow operator that needed to be here within 15 minutes, I'm assuming that that would come up in the hiring process. And that person could not live in Glens Falls.
maybe. I mean, but just, I think in terms of, if you're beginning to open up the employment pool, et cetera, it makes sense to be consistent with a provision that's already in regarding police and fire, but whatever.
I mean, I defer to you guys. I just, from my perspective, I don't know why, if this is the issue, then why would you limit yourself? One thing I will say, I totally understand the need for this. I'm very uncomfortable with it, and one of my reasons for it is the entire time I've lived in the city of Albany, we've dealt with a really terrible perception problem, and a lot of that, it's been, when I was on the school board, it was, nobody lived in the city. And there's incredible people that work for the school district that are so dedicated to our children that live outside the city. I'm not saying that where you live says your dedication to a place or the people there at all. Because there are people that live in the city that don't care at all. I mean, I understand that. But it does add to the perception that we struggle with everywhere. Everybody, I mean, people say, oh, oh my gosh, you live in the city. You raise your children in the city. We struggle with perception constantly. And that is one of my uncomforts with that. Now, does that solve the hiring problem? No, it does not, and I'm also a realist. But I am very uncomfortable with it. I think that it is essential as we look to move this forward with a potential sunset. I actually would like to have some sort of solution. I mean, Anne-Marie, I'm happy to work with you on it, but to have something where we actually do have a preference for everyone in a way that makes sense, I agree. I mean, we want to hire the best people possible. There's the logic, like your kids are in middle school, maybe in Glens Falls, who knows? You want this job, you know, that's the best person for it. You're not going to uproot your kids. You're not going to uproot your family. There's things I understand. You might not be able to find a place to buy. There's a lot of reasons why that makes sense. I still would like to have some real process where we say living in the city of Albany matters. And before we even deal with that, in our next budget cycle, I really believe that we need to have incentives for living in the city of Albany. If you live here, you should get an incentive. We need to do that, because it's also something where we've had this requirement. We've had people that moved into the city to work here, and now that's removed, and who knows what they've gone through. There should be some sort of incentive and some sort of reward for the people, for all of us, because the majority of us do live in the city, that live here, that choose to make where they work also their home, because that matters. And I think it matters. I think it's a significant thing. Another thing to provide that, where maybe you're going to accept the job, and maybe it's something where you think, hey, wow, I can get that, whatever it is, pay bump or a yearly bonus or whatever it is. If I live in the city and I'm looking for a house, maybe I'll look in the city. And I think there's a lot of people that actually would look in the city with that otherwise would think, I don't need to anymore, I'm going to look outside. So I really think that that is essential to have in this next upcoming budget, regardless of the status of the legislation, because that part of this needs to continue on. We need to value the people that live here. We need to value the employees that choose to make this their home. And so, with all that being said, Councilmember Keegan.
I just want to note in your comments really quickly that the city can't necessarily engage in financial matters outside of contract with the 13 bargaining units. So I don't want folks to be listening to us about budget and for us to come up with a concept without understanding the ramifications and the implications for the union contracts. That is not to say that the unions couldn't enter into a mid-contract MOU with the city for such a financial incentive, but it's a little bit more complicated for the vast majority of at least our competitive class workforce.
And totally understand, but we also have 25% of our non-competitive workforce that's not even covered in this, and they could at the very least be part of it. And I think we should be having that conversation with our unions, because I think it's valuable for us to say, we would like to pay the people that live in the city more. Whether it's a bonus, I don't know what that looks like, whatever it is. But I just think it's an important thing. I think that we need to have, if we don't have a requirement, then let's have a firm statement saying, thank you for choosing to make this place your home, because that matters. Councilmember Anani?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for your comments. And, is this legislation perfect, right? It's not, but I definitely think it's a step in the right direction. I think, sometimes being a council member, I always tell my colleagues, and there are some legislations that other council members introduced that I wasn't 100% in support of, but I always try to see the bigger picture that ultimately is a step in the right direction. I just want to remind my colleagues that, we shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I know that there are some changes that we can make, as any legislation is a breathing, living document. But I think that in the times that we're in right now, and also with the recommendation that was shared with the sunset date provision, I believe is a step in the right direction. Even if we pass this legislation, there's still going to continue to have a board of residency where those who live outside of those counties that suggested could still come in front of and ask for a one-year waiver. So, We're in challenging times, and I just urge my colleagues to support this. Thank you.
So if we're looking at moving this through the committee this evening, we are discussing adding a 3-year sunset to this provision. You might just want to keep the county thing, but I guess see how it goes. You might want to, I mean,
The state of New York? I don't.
yeah, I mean.
We're not married to it.
I would, like, I personally think the state of, I would agree the state of New York, because somebody could live in Massachusetts. I would prefer that they not. I would at least pay New York State taxes. But I would be comfortable with that. I don't know if the sponsors would be comfortable with that. I don't know if my colleagues would be comfortable with that, but
So right now, if you, the residency review board, they would consider waivers for people who do not live within that county or abutting, okay?
As currently drafted,
All right.
yes.
I think the current draft also has the review board reviewing any department heads who.
Yes, right.
So I think
Because
that's
department
part
heads
of
would
that as
still have
well.
a residency requirement. If you eliminate that, then you really don't, the residency review board will really only look at department heads.
why don't we keep it as is to keep it simpler? So the amendments would be a 3-year sunset, and also strengthening Section 2 to ensure that anybody that is hired within the sunset, we will not get, I think that we should allow Brett to tinker with that, but I think that we can pass it through the committee with the understanding that that is the intent of that section, and move forward. That makes sense?
Just one, did Councilmember Keegan raise an issue about the competitive, or is that something?
What I had said was, and it sounded to me as if Councilmember Farrell is also interested in working on that particular issue, is that we didn't want to hold up the legislation trying to figure out right now what we're doing with sort of that workforce that exists in this non-competitive limbo where they're not being hired based on civil service, and how we're going to balance the need to prioritize city residents with also balancing the need for actually being able to hire qualified people. And I think that the greatest concern there is that this sort of pool of the workforce is the most likely pool that could potentially in the future be manipulated by elected officials here in the city of Albany. And we want to ensure that we don't have, somebody become mayor and all of a sudden appointing friends from golly knows where to do critical functions for the city. But I agree with administrative services. It's going to be a little tricky because it's not straightforward. Like with competitive class exams, you have a list and you have the ability to say, I have this band of 100 and 10 of them are from the city. So we're going to canvass those 10 before we canvass the 20 that are from outside the city. And until we get no response on that canvas, we go to the next. When you get to folks who are not part of a competitive and they're a resume-based application process, there's a whole range of factors that can go into how you decide to hire that person, and it's going to be a little complicated how we ultimately figure out how to prioritize residents based upon, I don't know, and you don't necessarily want to say all things being equal because no one's ever going to have a resume that is exactly the same. So I think we're okay to do what we're doing here, provided we try to get something amended into this legislation before the end of session. before December 31st.
This year?
Yeah.
Oh, because,
Yeah, December
Oh, oh, I
31st
see
would,
what- yeah,
would
yeah,
be
yeah.
the end of
No.
session. We're
Yep,
moving
yep.
to a new
Got it, got it. Yep,
administration.
yep.
I would want to make sure
Yeah,
that we
yeah,
deal
no,
with
no,
that
that makes
issue
sense.
before we transition.
no, totally agreed. And then at that point, we could also remove the sunset and just make it permanent. Because then we would be set up for a situation whether, and that's what I'd been speaking with Anne Marie about earlier, was that we want to be ready for any situation. So if we're in a situation where there's the stack like on Alfredo's desks, which he just brought those in for this example too. They're not usually there. But of resumes that there is a preference given for people that live in the city.
I think we can workshop this with you. I think we can come up with something together. It just might, we do have an urgency to try to get it moving along, but I absolutely think we can get this going this year.
I think with those amendments, we could, if the sponsors are comfortable and the people on the committee are comfortable, we can move this through the committee. Someone like to move it?
Don't I have to formally move it?
You should
Okay.
formally move it.
I make a motion to move local law L of 2024 pending amendments out of committee with a positive recommendation.
Councilmember Conti seconds. All those in favor?
Aye.
I can officially abstain, right? Like it's still going to go through the committee. Yes. You
Local
got
laws
three.
three, right?
Yes. All right. Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming in and being part of this discussion and the long evening after the long day of working. We very much appreciate all of you. And with all that said, could I get a motion to adjourn?
Adjourn second.
Motion by Councilmember Keegan, seconded by Councilmember Anane. Thank you all.